All right, Dave, welcome.
All right. Thanks, Jake.
Let's talk
Glad
about
to be.
beer.
Yeah, let's talk beer. Yeah, glad to be here. And thanks for coming. I want to just kind of give a little brief history about the Three Forks Brewery, how it came to be, and then go into the brewing process because I've been brewing for 30 years. Actually, my anniversary is this Tuesday. Will be the 30 years after my very first batch of brewing beer. And so I want to talk about the brewing process at Three Forks because it's always fascinating to me. And then just kind of finish up with just talking about some of our beers and some of the special beers that I've done recently. So we started out in 2011 with a concept, and the first thing we needed to get was a license to brew. Basically, and that comes from the TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau. And so here's a picture of me right in the future brewery downtown Nevada City, holding what was kind of hard to get. We had to jump through some hoops. They don't just give anybody a license to brew, it turns out. So I was very happy that day. And the next, came the design. I did a lot of homework and finally selected a manufacturer to kind of help me through it. I mean, I did all the placement of everything, and then I sent them my drawings, and they kind of idiot proofed it for me. And this is their drawing that they did, their CAD of what the brewery was going to look like. And then the next step, a real fun part of the project, was the build out and the construction. I sure would not like to go back and do that ever again. It was a lot of work. But here you're looking right down the walk-in brewery cooler to where the brewery is in the far left corner. And so that construction went on for a while, and then finally the happy day, the equipment arrived. Here's the big semi with all our brewery equipment. It's a funny story. The trucker actually called me the night before saying that he was gonna stay at the Kmart parking lot to spend the night there, and he was going to deliver everything the next morning. So I went out the next morning, all excited, waiting. He called me when he was leaving, and I waited and I waited and I waited in downtown Nevada City. I was like, where is he? And I finally called him. I said, where are you? And he says, I'm just turning on to Old Mill Road now. Yeah, Jake knows where Old Mill Road is. Old Mill Road is where my original working address was, my house, which is a half an hour from town, out a dirt road on 5 acres. And so I said, whoa, stop, turn around, come back to Nevada City. So, 40 minutes later, he got there, and we got the equipment and put it in place. And the next step with these beautiful shiny tanks is to assemble everything. So here I am putting the fermenters together, all the parts on. The manufacturer sent a guy up to work with me for 2 days to get everything in place, put it all together. Excuse me. And then a month later, they sent another guy up there to help me commission it, brew the first 2 batches. And at the end of that third day, he stood at the door going to catch his flight, turned to me, shook my hand, said, good luck, you're on your own. And boy, he wasn't kidding. I had so much more to learn at that point. But the final product looked like this. I mean, you can see everything in place. And we've got a really nice state-of-the-art brewery. It's very small, but you can everything's right close to you, so you can use all those fermenters very efficiently. The one thing you can't see when you're in the restaurant or the brew pub is the walk-in cooler that's behind the walls where the taps are. And here's a picture of the interior of that. We have 6 serving tanks and a combination of kegs to service the 8 taps. So the beer gets transferred in there to get carbonated and then goes right to the taps in the restaurant. So that's a brief history of the brewery. And I'm going to just talk about the whole process, like on a typical brew day. And it starts off with the barley and cracking the barley. And here's our ginormous Robix malt mills built in the Czech Republic. And that thing is really burly. Its function is to crack the barley and expose the starchy interior, which is later going to be converted into sugar and then later into alcohol. But the key is to not pulverize the husks of the barley, but just to barely crack them. It drops through into a white tube. You can see it barely in the bottom of this picture, and then it gets moved. cracked barley gets moved to the grist hydrator, and you can see this auger is pushing it through that tube, and I'm hooking it up where it's going to drop down that tube and drop into the mash tun. That vessel there is called the mash tun, which is where all the starches are going to be converted into the sugar. The grist hydrator is going to mix the barley with water. So we pump in water through a hose that mixes as it drops in to get it nice and wet. And the water is at a very, very specific temperature, because there's a very specific temperature that the enzymes that are present in the barley are going to convert the starches into sugars. And it's the range is 140 to 159, but you have two different enzymes active. So in the lower range, you're going to get a much more fermentable type of sugar, and it's going to lead to a drier beer. At the upper range, you're going to get more dextrins and more unfermentable sugars left as a residual, and you're going to get a beer with much more body or residual sweetness. Most brewers will kind of go near the middle of that, because that's going to give them the best balance. And so we typically shoot for around 150 to 154. And here, part of the process in stirring is when this is all coming in, is that it has a tendency when it hits the surface to turn into these dough balls that the barley is not actually in contact with the water. So the brewer's job at this point is just to gently stir that as it's dropping in. It takes about 20 minutes for us to move about 500 pounds of malt through that whole process. And in the end, you get the mash temperature that you're shooting for. There's a mash probe that goes into the mash tun. And here in this case, we were shooting for 153, or I'm going to say we were shooting for 153 because, that's what we got. Once that's done, the next process is called, excuse me, the Vorlauf. The Vorlauf, they got a lot of really great German words in brewing. Vorlauf is a German word. And you're going to slowly let the wet sugar water, after it's been converted, into this 9-gallon stainless steel pot, and you can see it's coming in at a tangent, and you can see all these particulates coming through there, and that process is going to create a whirlpool in the grant, and all those particulates are going to go towards the center and be left behind. And this is a really interesting part of the process, is you're going to pump out of the grant and on top of the grain bed, and this is a little steamy in there, but you can see we're pumping out of that grant, that stainless steel pot, back on top of the grain bed, and you'll do that for a period of about 20 minutes. And what happens during that time is that the whole mash, all the barley, all the husks, they all start to kind of float in a way that the barley husks start to act as a natural filter bed, so that you eventually will clarify the wort. And at the very end, you can see that's 20 minutes later. When it started off, it was all cloudy and particulate laden, but at the end, it's nice and clear. And once that happens, you're ready to go to the next step, which is called the runoff. And that's when you are pumping, instead you just close one valve and open another, and you're pumping directly into the boil kettle. And that process takes about 2 hours. And as you're doing that, you're conducting the Sparge, another German word, I love it, and you're spraying hot water at about 170 degrees on top of the bed of the mash. And the whole process is designed to rinse all the sugars that are in the mash at that point, to extract as much sugar as you can. And so you can send that sugar water, which is essentially called wort, another German word, it's unfermented beer, and it sends that all to the boil kettle. And then you start the boil, and here you can see that's probably about 9.5 barrels, which is about 290 gallons of hot boiling sugar water, essentially. The beginning of the boil, we'll add some hops. The hops at the beginning are typically to only give it bitterness, a measured amount of bitterness. It also can help in keeping it from boiling over, which is a terrifying thing when you've got that much hot boiling liquid. And so then after that, while that boil is going on, I should say, you have to deal with all the grain that's left in the mash tun. So we hoe out the grain into 5 or 6 buckets. The dry weight doubles. So if we started with 500 pounds of dry weight, we're going to have about 1,000 pounds coming out wet. The spent grain gets picked up by AM Ranch, local rancher that we buy a lot of meats from, and they end up feeding it to their cattle, and we buy the beef back from the cattle. So it's really awesome circle going on here. And while the boil is going on, there's cleaning, lots of cleaning. It's said that brewing is 90% cleaning, and I kind of tend to think they're right at this point, having done it for a while. So here I am just washing off these screens that sit at the bottom of the mash tun. And the next step at the end of the boil is the Whirlpool hops. Here's a bucket of 16 pounds of hops for our Dynamite Double IPA, which is our biggest, hoppiest beer. And we pour those into the very end after we turn the kettle off for the Whirlpool. And we have this hose that goes in about 1/3 of the way up on the boil kettle that is tangential, and we pump out of the bottom and up through that tangential inlet, and it creates a natural whirlpool in the boil kettle. And the point of that is like what we saw earlier in the grant, where it'll eventually, all this hop debris and there's big protein particulates that are formed during the boil, they will all gravitate towards the center of the boil kettle, and then we could leave them behind. And here you see that at the very end, after we've pumped everything out, you have this mass of hops and other things that you don't want to send to the fermenter. So there they are in the middle of the boil kettle. The knockout is the final step of the brew day, and what you here see is just a picture of our heat exchanger, but we end up pumping the hot wort through one side of this heat exchanger plates. The other side has cold water pumping through it, so that we can have it going on its way to the fermenter at a knockout temperature, which for us is typically around 64, 65 degrees. If you have it too hot, well, then the yeast won't perform, won't be able to do its job. It'll and if you have it too low, the yeast won't activate. So there's a specific temperature range that you're going for. Here you can see us pumping into the fermenter, and as we're pumping in there, we're pumping in the yeast. So we know the temperature is good, and that stainless steel converted keg is what's called a yeast drink. And we will measure out a specific amount, 20, 25, 27 pounds of yeast, and pump it in line into the fermenter. The yeast comes from a previous batch. We harvest from the cone of the fermenter about 10 generations of yeast before we would go back to a yeast lab and get what's called a fresh pitch. So you're able each time you ferment a beer, you're going to create a new generation of yeast, and you can keep doing that over and over again until eventually you start to get what's kind of like a genetic drift, and the yeast doesn't perform the way it should, and then at that point you need to go and get a pure pitch again. You also pump in with oxygen, because the yeast needs a lot of oxygen at the beginning of the fermentation process. And then the final thing to do, other than cleaning on the brewery day, is to control the temperature. This is the fermentation control panel. You can see all 6 of our fermenters are displayed there. The yeast wants to be at a fairly narrow range, and all the fermenters have these dual jackets that runs a glycol solution through them. So you can cool a beer down with these by running that glycol through, because the active process of fermenting is exothermic, and the yeast is going to create all this heat. So if I want to keep it at 64, 65 degrees, if I didn't have that on, it would just go well on its way, and it would get up to maybe even 80 degrees if I didn't have the capacity to cool it down versus the control panel. And finished product, but it doesn't happen that same day. But the finished product is award-winning beer. This is just one of our random pictures of. We've entered a lot of beer in the California State Fair commercial craft brew competition, and we've garnered a fair amount of awards for that. So we're pretty happy about that. So that's a given brew day.
How long does it ferment?
It takes about probably about 6 days to get to what's we call final gravity, meaning there's no more conversion into alcohol, but we let it condition usually for an ale at least another 4 or 5 days. And for a lager, the lager takes a lot longer. Lagers take 3 weeks. Ales take a third of that, or half of that. Yeah. So yeah, and the next thing I just want to kind of close on a little bit is on our beers. I kind of feel like we've got a little bit of something for everybody. I like this picture just because it's got all 8 beers lined up, and you can just see they all just kind of look, they all got a very different color. I really like a lot of traditional beers. I like lagers. I like West Coast IPAs, and some of the newer styles. The main thing that I really tried to strive for at Three Forks is just to make sure that the beers are balanced, because sometimes you can have a beer that's just way too bitter, or a beer that's way too sweet, or whatever. I just want them to have a clean balance to them, and to be consistent. We brewed a special beer recently. Here's Brian Ford and his 2 brewers from Auburn Ale House, and he and I were talking a couple months ago about the kind of beers that we like, and I've known Brian for a long time. He actually in 1997, when he was the first brewer at Stonehouse Brewery, he supplied me with some yeast for one of my home brews that I entered in the national homebrew competition, and I ended up winning a gold that year for that. So we got a connection that goes way back. But anyway, we were talking about how we both, we love West Coast IPAs. He's won multiple awards with that, and he said, let's do a collaboration beer. So we came up with a recipe and came up with a name. We're calling it Hopway 49 IPA. And we brewed a batch at his brewery, and then we came and brew a batch at Three Forks, and they canned some of their batch just last week. They had a release party for that on Friday, and we are selling some of those at our brew pub right now. So you can come down and try it on tap, or you can come down and get a 4-pack of the cans and take with you. And you get a 10% discount if you mention the Center for the Performing Arts as a special perk. So yeah, so that is kind of my wrap up. And yeah.
Okay, thanks. Very interesting. I have many questions for you.
Yeah, go for it.
My first question, Dave, is, I've known you since before Three Forks, when you were running the comics shop and brewing was your hobby, and you were a great brewer back then, and everybody loved your beer back then. And then you've been through this whole journey. And my question for you is, do you still love brewing?
I probably love brewing more than I ever have.
Really? You enjoy all your time in there, and It's always, you're excited to go to work?
I am, but I mean, I probably am spending less time in there than I ever have too. And that's just kind of an evolution of how the business has gone. And so I have a full-time assistant brewer that is now probably doing 90% of the brewing. I mean, when it gets busy again, kind of post-pandemic world, when it's busy again, then it's too much for one person, and I'll probably get to spend some more time down there. And you notice how I say it, I'll get to spend some more time there, because that's kind of how I look at it. But the business has kind of needed me in other areas, and it's probably been a good thing for me to kind of spend some more time in some doing some other things there. But I love it when I get to brew. So that day that the Auburn crew came down, I told James, my awesome assistant brewer, I was like, dude, I'm going to take this one. I'm going to brew this one. And, it was a good day. So,
Speaking of the pandemic, here we are. It looks like things are starting to open up more. Can I go drink a beer at Three Forks right now?
Yeah, but you should be a little hungry too, because we're gonna make you buy some food. I mean, it's not a marketing ploy either. It's we're definitely rule followers throughout this whole ordeal. And right now, the stipulation is put forth by the ABC is that you have to serve a meal with the alcoholic beverage. And so we're really trying our very best to adhere to that. And, luckily most people that come to Three Forks, like to eat the food. So it works. It's working out fine. And I think that's probably going to loosen up a little bit as we get more people vaccinated and we move a little further into the summer.
Right. But there is indoor eating now.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. When we got into the red tier a couple of weeks ago, we got access to about 25% capacity. So for us, that, probably means 20 seats inside or something like that. And we still have the full outdoor seating with a patio and the tent that we have out there in the parking lot. So it's pretty accessible.
I mean, Three Forks has been such a success story, and then COVID hit, and you guys are still here. You're still with us. I mean, I'm sure it's been kind of a nightmare, to be honest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, we've the word pivot has been used a lot in terms of what businesses have had to do, and especially I think in the hospitality industry. So we've taken every punch, and we just keep trying to hang in there and survive. Nobody's really thriving in the restaurant biz right now, but we're here, and we're going to be here.
What about the actual brewing side of it? Did you cut way back on your brewing during this?
Yeah, we brewed less in 2020 than we did in 2019. Not, I think we dropped by maybe like 15% less. It's not a huge amount of number because, I mean, we've been, our bottle sales increased, of course, during the pandemic. And we bottle a limited amount right there in the brewery. And we've been doing $10 growler sales like crazy. I'm just like, it's a great deal. And it keeps us brewing and keeps the beer moving and keeps it fresh. So it hasn't been that dramatic of a drop.
Thank you for keeping keeping Nevada County supplied with growlers. Remember, Joe wants to know, with so many restaurants not following the rules, and we won't name names, how'd that make you feel running your business with the restriction? Asking for another rule follower. Loaded question.
Oh yeah, that is a loaded question. And well, I mean, it's everybody is making decisions. The people that have maybe bent the rules a little, they have their own rationale for doing that. And everybody's trying to survive. And I could proffer an opinion on whether we would all be better, but it doesn't really take into account what their financial situation is. I don't know that, and I'm not gonna assume that I do. So I mean, it's a difficult position to be in for everybody, and I'm just we're doing what we think we need to do, and and if I had to do it all over again, I would. God, if I had to do it all over again, what an awful thought. But I would do it the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you guys had to shut down completely at some point because you had a little COVID family or something. Yeah, and that was really the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean there wasn't really much choice, and so we just bit the bullet and did it. And yeah.
Let me ask another question about the beginning. So, I mean, you were an amateur brewer, and you basically went from 0 to 100 miles an hour, becoming a professional brewer overnight. You said you designed the brewery yourself, or at least the initial ideas. Would you do things different? Would you just make changes to the brewery if you could at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question. I mean, in some respects, I wouldn't want to, I would almost want to like sacrifice a tiny bit of room in the walk-in cooler of the brewery where all the serving tanks are, for example. I might end up creating more work for me and my assistant brewer to have to clean kegs more regularly and do more hoop jumping to be able to use the space less. But I mean, our kitchen is extremely small, and sometimes I feel like, wow, I wish I could give a little bit more room to them, you know. But for the most part, though, I do have a really small brewery. It's like 425 square feet. That is small as breweries go. So I mean, I think we did pretty well. I mean, we did pretty well considering that. Yeah. Well, let's see. It's how many brew pubs have you opened, Shauna? Yeah, me too. 0. You know. Yeah. We did a lot of homework. We did a whole lot of homework on it, and I had to do the brewery. I had to go from being a home brewer. I didn't just step in. I was like, okay, I know exactly what I've been using pumps for, let's see, carry the one 0 years now. And all of a sudden I'm using multiple pumps and moving beer and doing things in a lot different way. But there was a lot of information out there for me to glean from other brewers online and elsewhere. And I definitely spent several years doing that.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is Three Forks saved Nevada City in many ways. I mean, you guys, the whole revitalization and excitement that's happening in downtown Nevada City the last 10 years, you guys are at the front of that. Good job.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think there was a niche there. There was something waiting to happen, and we were in the right place and the right thing. I think. Yeah,
on both sides, on the brew side and on the food side.
Food side, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of what we do with our food and our attention to quality and to sourcing local and trying to just trying to be as sustainable as possible.
Yeah. My only complaint about Three Forks, I would say, is that traditionally it's been a little too crowded and busy for me. It's like, oh God, I got to squeeze in here and deal with all my friends and neighbors.
Yeah, it's not really designed for agoraphobia, Jake. I think you need to. No, that's a good problem to have, right?
Right, exactly. Well, gosh, it's 4:30 here, folks. Anybody have any questions? Brooks, questions?
Yeah. I would like to ask a question. I'd like to get a little bit into the details of beer making. I'm a home brewer, have been for over 20 years. I may take you back to your Three Forks days. I have a problem with my water content, how much water I use at mash. I have a 3-tiered system. I make 5 gallons. I usually run about 1.3 quarts per pound of grain. That's a little thick, so I thin it down because I end up pumping the wort with a pump through the mash tun into a hot liquor tank to keep it at temperature. Mm-hmm. Then I also have a bigger problem with my Sparge water. And I'm just not sure how to get the right amount of Sparge water. I always leave a lot of water in the mash tun after I've gotten my my boil kettle to where I want it to be.
Okay. Well, first off, just in terms of the volume that you're getting into your boil kettle and the gravity, the sugar content, is it kind of near where your target is?
I'm usually a little bit low. My last batch was supposed to come in at about 8.5%, and I was 7.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, because when I used to have a 3-tier system that I brewed on as a home brewer, and I would basically I would keep the Sparge water going on top. I didn't really care how much was left over as long as I was getting close to my target. I don't know if you're using any brewing software. I imagine you probably are. I ended up at the end of my home brewing years, I was using Beersmith, which I found to be pretty helpful software to kind of help navigate what I could expect. And it's pretty inexpensive, as I recall, too. But as far as I think at the brewery we use 1.4 pounds per quart, which is a little thinner. But it's that we kind of do that just to kind of make the whole process, a little bit more manageable when you're dealing with basically 1,000 pounds of something. But it works out fine for the extraction. So are you, do you feel like you're getting good extraction out of your grain?
Not what I think I would. I bet the brewery's probably at about a 75% efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through a period of time where I was just raising my grain bill by about 10% to try to make up for that. Sure. But I've kind of cut back on that idea.
Yeah. That's not uncommon though. I mean, I don't remember exactly what my efficiency was. All I know is that it's way more, it's way higher in the professional setting with the equipment that we, that a lot of professional brewers have at their disposal. So I was actually, in the homework that I did, I was told, yeah, your efficiency is going to go up once you start using this equipment, and it certainly did. So I had to adjust my recipes on the professional side to account for that. But I think I did what you did. I was like, well, I didn't get enough sugar out of that, so the next time I'll just put more grain in.
Yeah.
And I would say that I would say go, run off, do the runoff slow. There's no reason to hurry it, because if you hurry it, sometimes you can end up leaving some sugars behind and losing out on efficiency.
So an hour or 90 minutes? You mentioned that your sparge was about 2 hours to get the wort into the kettle.
As a home brewer, I think, for when I was doing 10-gallon batches, I think I was probably getting everything in an hour to an hour and a half.
Okay. Thanks. And I'll look back at Beersmith. I did use some software years ago, but with the upgrading of computers and so forth, that wouldn't transfer into what I was using before. It wouldn't work. So I've sort of gone on my own and just worked out recipes from historic recipes that I've made and done it that way. But Great. Thank you, and really appreciate having Three Forks nearby, and I'm glad to hear you're doing okay at Three Forks, and haven't been there for a long time because of obviously COVID. But now that my wife and I are all vaccinated, we hope to get back soon.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Brooke. We'd love to see you there.
All right. Thank you.
There's a whole conversation I didn't understand at all. But Conrad, I see you're shaking, you're nodding your head like you're a brewer also? No, but you understand?
I know some of the language. I did a few 5-gallon batches, so the language makes sense to me, but I have very little actual experience.
So Dave, let me ask you, how much experimenting do you do these days? Are you out there just trying wild things in those giant kettles, or do you ever do experiments at home still, or just tired of that?
I don't do anything at home anymore, but and I mean, I can't say that I'm doing crazy experimenting, because I'm kind of a traditionalist, and when it comes to beers, I want the beers to be good. I think there's a reason that they're, it's kind of like, with wine. I mean, you're not getting, wow, is that a marshmallow graham cracker, whatever wine? No, you're not. And that's just not my thing. I want the beers to taste like, like beers. I mean, we do, we have done, some more popular, like the hazy is a good example. Obviously hazies are really popular. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do a hazy. But instead of doing it on like my little pilot system, that would be my homebrew system, I said years ago that my pilot system is my 7-barrel Three Forks brewery. That's my pilot system. So I've done a lot of new beers on it, but because I'm familiar with what it can do, and I have a familiarity with the balance and the ingredients, I feel usually pretty confident that it's going to be okay.
What are your 3 favorite beers? Styles.
My 3 favorite styles. Okay. Yeah. I love a West Coast IPA for sure. And a German lager was called a Munich Helles style. That's what our Mother's Beach Blonde is a German lager. It's called a Helles. That would be number 2, and probably The number 3 would be the Maibach, which is another German lager. It's a pale Bock beer. Comes out every May. We've got one right now conditioning that we're going to release in 3 weeks for the beginning of May. And I love that beer. It's crisp. It's clean. It's got a bit of a kick at about 6.5 to 7%, and you can't tell when you drink it. But it's a wonderful beer.
Okay, last question. Will Three Forks ever serve a Michelada?
I'm really glad you didn't ask me about a seltzer. Sure, maybe. How sure, maybe? Isn't that that's pretty much yeah.
Sounds good.
If there's beer in there, there's a good chance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. It's been fascinating as always. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next weekend. Thanks, Dave.
All right, thanks.